At a family dinner, she declared, "My ex will always be part of my life. If you don't like that, don't marry me." Everyone stared at me. I just said, "Okay." A week later, the invitations were cancelled, and she realized the marriage was too. It all came to a head at a Sunday dinner. One of those tense pre-wedding family gatherings where two tribes who have nothing in common are forced to pretend they're about to be joined for life. My parents, a quiet traditional couple who have been married for 42 years, were on one side of the table. They'd built their life together in Columbus, Ohio, through hard work and mutual respect. On the other side were my fiancée Victoria's parents. A pair of retired marriage counselors who spoke in a language of wellness buzzwords and believed every boundary was a suggestion, an outdated relic of toxic masculinity, and in the middle of it all was Brandon. Brandon was Victoria's ex-boyfriend. But to hear her and her family tell it, he was more like a soul brother, an essential part of her personal ecosystem. He was at every holiday, every birthday, every dinner. He had a key to her parents' lake house in Michigan. He was the constant smug ghost at the feast of our relationship. I'd made my feelings about him clear from the beginning. I'm not a jealous man, but I believe in boundaries. I believe a past relationship should be in the past, not sitting at your dinner table making inside jokes with your future wife. My objections were always met with the same condescending lecture from Victoria and her parents about my possessive masculine tendencies and my inability to embrace a more fluid modern concept of family. They treated my traditional values like a charming but ultimately primitive character flaw, something I'd grow out of once I evolved past my Midwestern upbringing. That I went along with it, not because I was weak, but because I was playing the long game. I wanted to see how far she would push it. I needed to know if the foundation we were building on was solid rock or just sand. Every man has his breaking point, that invisible line where patience ends and self-respect begins. I was waiting to see if Victoria would drag me across mine. The topic of the wedding seating chart came up over apple pie and coffee. My mother, a woman who speaks her mind with a quiet but firm dignity, had a simple question. "Victoria, sweetheart," she began, looking at the draft of the chart spread across the dining table. "I see you have Brandon seated at the main family table next to your Aunt Carol. I was just wondering if that was the best place for him. Perhaps one of the friends' tables would be more appropriate." The air in the room instantly went from chilly to arctic. Victoria's mother, Diane, put her fork down with a clatter that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. Victoria herself flushed a deep angry red, the color rising from her neck to her cheeks like a thermometer about to burst. "My mother is just concerned about optics, Victoria," I said, stepping in before she could explode. "Having your ex-boyfriend at the family table might send a confusing message to our guests. People might wonder about the nature of your relationship." Victoria turned on me, her eyes flashing with that particular brand of righteous anger I'd come to know too well. "A confusing message? The only confusing message here is that you and your parents are still living in the 1950s. Brandon is my best friend. He is family. He was a part of my life long before you were, and he will be a part of my life long after. Well, he will always be a part of my life." Her father, Gregory, chimed in then, his voice dripping with condescension, that therapist tone he used when he thought he was educating someone less enlightened. "Charles, we've talked about this. Your rigid definitions of relationships are what cause insecurity. Victoria and Brandon have a beautiful evolved connection. You should be celebrating that, not trying to control it." It was a perfectly executed two-on-one attack, with Diane nodding in solemn agreement like a judge on a panel. They had been practicing this kind of psychological maneuvering for years, weaponizing therapy speak to shut down any opposition. But this time, it was different. This time, my parents were there, watching this woman and her family treat me and our impending marriage with such casual, arrogant disrespect. Victoria, feeling emboldened by her parents' support, decided to press her advantage. She stood up, her hands on her hips in that power pose she'd learned from some TED Talk, and delivered the line that would bring the entire parade to a crashing halt. She looked from my mother to me, her voice loud and clear for the entire room to hear. "Let me make this perfectly clear for everyone. My ex will always be a part of my life. He will be at our wedding. He will be at our children's baptisms. He will be at our holidays. That is a non-negotiable fact. If you don't like that, then don't marry me." The ultimatum hung in the silent room like a guillotine blade. It was a declaration of war. Everyone stared at me, waiting for my reaction. They expected me to argue, to plead, to back down, as I had done so many times before, just to keep the peace. Victoria had a smug, triumphant look on her face. She thought she had me trapped, thought she'd finally put me in my place in front of everyone, that I didn't say a word for a full minute. I looked at her, standing there in all her defiant arrogance. I looked at her enabling parents, nodding in approval like she'd just delivered the Gettysburg Address. I looked at my own parents, their faces a mixture of shock and quiet dignity. And then I looked back at her. The long game was over. She had just shown me the final stress test results, and the structure was condemned that I gave a slow, deliberate nod. Okay, I said. The word was so quiet, so devoid of emotion that it seemed to confuse her. Okay, she repeated, her tone mocking. Okay, you'll behave. Okay, you'll stop being a jealous child. No, I said, standing up from the table. I folded my napkin and placed it on my plate with the same care you'd use closing a book you'd never open again. Okay, I won't marry you. I turned to my parents. Mom, Dad, we're leaving. And without another look at Victoria or her stunned, speechless family, the three of us walked out of the house and out of their lives. The front door closing behind us was the quietest, most final sound I'd ever heard. The drive home with my parents was silent for the first 10 minutes. My father just drove his Ford pickup, his eyes fixed on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel. My mother stared out the window at the Columbus suburbs rolling past. I think they were waiting for me to break down, to show some sign of regret or heartbreak, but I felt nothing but a profound, almost surreal sense of peace. The weight of a 5-year charade had just been lifted from my shoulders. Finally, my dad spoke, his voice low and steady. Are you sure about this, son? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said to him. My mother turned around from the passenger seat. There were no tears in her eyes, just a quiet, fierce pride. Good, she said. She was not the one for you. We were just waiting for you to see it. When I got back to my own house in the Clintonville neighborhood, the house I had bought with my own money, the one Victoria had been living in for the past 2 years, my phone was a war zone. Dozens of missed calls, a flood of texts from Victoria, her parents, her friends, even from Brandon himself. They ranged from furious to confused to pleading. Victoria, what was that? You just walked out. You can't be serious. Diane, Charles, you have deeply hurt our daughter. You need to come back and apologize immediately. Brandon, dude, what the hell is your problem? You're blowing this way out of proportion. They were all operating under the same delusion that this was a tantrum, a momentary fit of pique that could be smoothed over with a few condescending lectures and a non-apology. They hadn't yet grasped the finality of the word okay. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I made a single phone call. It was to our wedding planner, a woman named Angela, who was a consummate professional. Angela, I said. It's Charles. There's been a change of plans. The wedding is off permanently. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Charles, the invitations are scheduled to be mailed out tomorrow morning. I need you to stop that immediately, I said. Do not send out a single invitation. As for the rest of it, I need you to begin the cancellation process for all vendors. My fiancée and her family will be your point of contact for all financial matters moving forward. They were handling the payments, so they will need to handle the refunds and the cancellation fees. This was a crucial part of my strategy. I hadn't paid for the wedding. Gregory had, a fact he had made sure everyone was aware of, constantly reminding people of his generosity. Now the financial burden of unwinding a massive 6-figure event was his problem, not mine. The next morning, the real shockwave hit. Angela, doing her job with ruthless efficiency, began making the calls. The first one, of course, was to Victoria's parents. I would have paid $1,000 to be a fly on the wall for that conversation: the caterer at North Star Cafe, the florist from Flowers by Doris, the band, the venue at the Franklin Park Conservatory. Each call was another nail in the coffin of their grand social event. Another massive non-refundable deposit lost. Gregory called me, his voice a strangled roar. What have you done? Do you know how much money we are losing? You can't just do this. I didn't do anything, I said, my voice calm as a summer lake. I just accepted your daughter's terms. She gave me an ultimatum. Accept her ex-boyfriend as a permanent fixture in our marriage or don't marry her. I chose the latter. I respected her boundary. You can't just, the consequences of that choice are now yours to manage, I continued. I suggest you contact Angela to discuss the details. He started sputtering about lawyers and lawsuits and breach of promise. I almost laughed. Breach of promise? I said, a cold, empty sound escaping my throat. You were there, Gregory. You heard her. You have a dozen witnesses who heard her deliver an ultimatum at a family dinner. She made the continuation of our marriage conditional, and I simply declined the conditions. There is no lawsuit. There is only the bill for a party you are no longer hosting. I hung up before he could respond. The next person to appear was Victoria herself. She showed up at my house that afternoon, using her key to let herself in. She found me in the living room surrounded by empty boxes from Home Depot. I was packing her things, methodically sorting through the life she'd built in my space. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, her face a mask of disbelief. "I'm helping you move," I said, not even looking up from the box I was filling with her books. "You're going to need to find a new place to live. You can't kick me out. I live here." "No, Victoria," I said, finally standing up to face her. "You've been staying here. This is my house. My name is on the deed, and your invitation has been revoked. I'll be changing the locks tomorrow. I suggest you arrange for your parents to come and pick up your belongings." She finally broke down, the arrogant, confident facade crumbling to reveal the terrified, entitled child underneath. She cried. She begged. She pleaded. She said she didn't mean it, that it was just a stupid thing to say, that she loved me. That I just stood there, unmoved. "The time for that, Victoria, was when my mother was at your dinner table being treated with disrespect. The time for that was before you made your ex-boyfriend a condition of our marriage. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." The 30 days that followed were a slow, brutal education for Victoria in the concept of consequences. She and her family had lived their entire lives in a soft, padded world of second chances and consequence-free choices. A world cushioned by their money and their shared delusion of intellectual superiority. That world was now gone, burned to ash by a single word, okay. The first lesson was financial. Gregory, after a week of threats and bluster, finally realized I was not going to contribute a single cent to the financial disaster of the cancelled wedding. The final bill for the lost deposits and cancellation fees, I heard through the grapevine, was close to $100,000. It was a staggering blow even for them. Despite Gregory's successful practice, the second lesson was social. They tried to spin the narrative, of course. They told their friends in their German village social circle that I was emotionally unstable, that I had a breakdown and called off the wedding for no reason. But the story was too good, too juicy. A dozen people had been at that dinner. The story of Victoria's ultimatum and my quiet final acceptance spread like wildfire through their social circle. She wasn't the victim. She was the arrogant fiancée who had overplayed her hand and lost everything. Victoria, after being forced to move out of my house, had to move back in with her parents. The atmosphere in that house, I was told by a mutual friend who'd remained neutral, was toxic. Her parents, facing a massive financial loss and a public humiliation, resented her. They were constantly fighting. The thin veneer of their evolved family dynamic stripped away to reveal the bitter, dysfunctional reality underneath. Brandon, the ex-boyfriend, the man who was so essential to her life, proved to be less than useless in a real crisis. He was a fun accessory for a woman who had a stable, successful fiancé. He was not interested in being the support system for a broke, unemployed, and emotionally volatile single woman living with her parents. He slowly, quietly began to distance himself. The constant calls and texts stopped. He was busy. He had other plans. He was, in the end, just another fair-weather friend. While her world was burning down, I was quietly rebuilding mine. I took a 2-week trip to Ireland, a trip I had always wanted to take but had put off because Victoria had no interest in it. She'd called it boring and old-fashioned, preferring resort vacations in Cancun. I came back feeling refreshed and clear-headed, with a camera full of photos of ancient castles and green hills that stretched to the horizon. That I focused on my work as a structural engineer, landing the biggest project of my career with a firm in Cleveland. I reconnected with friends who had drifted away, Friends who had never liked the person I became when I was with Victoria. The guy who constantly had to check his phone, who always had to leave events early, who walked on eggshells around his own opinions that I didn't date. I wasn't interested. I was enjoying the peace, the quiet, the freedom of a life that was entirely my own. A life where I didn't have to constantly navigate the emotional minefield of another person's insecurities and her ex-boyfriend's omnipresence. The final and most satisfying lesson for Victoria came about 6 months after our breakup. A major engineering journal published a feature on a historic bridge I had spent the last 2 years restoring in Cincinnati. The Roebling Suspension Bridge project had been my passion, my baby. It was a huge honor, the pinnacle of my career so far. The article included a gala event celebrating the completion of the restoration, an event attended by the governor and some of the most influential people in the state. There was a picture of me standing on the bridge at sunset, accepting an award for the project. I looked confident, successful, and genuinely happy. The kind of happy you can only be when you're living authentically, not performing for someone else's approval. That I heard through the grapevine that Victoria had seen the article. That she'd spent an hour staring at the photos, at the life I was building without her. The life that didn't include Brandon or condescending therapy speak or constant boundary negotiations. That I started dating again about 6 months ago. Her name is Catherine. She's a veterinarian at a clinic in Grandview Heights. She's kind, she's brilliant, and she has a backbone of steel. Her family is wonderful, a loud, loving Greek family who welcomed me with open arms and too much moussaka. Her past is her past, and my past is mine. We are building a future together, a future based on mutual respect and clear, honest boundaries. Catherine has an ex-boyfriend. His name is Andrew. I met him exactly once, at a chance encounter at a coffee shop. He was polite, the interaction lasted maybe 3 minutes, and then he went on with his life. That's how normal people handle past relationships. They don't make them the centerpiece of their identity. That I hadn't seen or spoken to Victoria in over a year. I had blocked her and her entire family on everything, social media, phone, email. But I heard things through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances, the kind of gossip that floats around Columbus like pollen in spring. Her parents had been forced to sell their large house in Bexley and downsize to a condo in Worthington. The financial hit from the wedding, combined with some of Gregory's other creative financial ventures going south, had crippled them. The retired life they'd envisioned was now a budget spreadsheet and heated arguments about money. Victoria was still living with them. She had tried to launch a career as a life coach, complete with a website and Instagram presence, but without my money to fund the marketing and the professional photography, it had failed to launch. She was working part-time at Anthropology, a job she apparently hated, folding sweaters and dealing with the kind of customers she'd once been. Brandon was completely out of the picture. He had gotten engaged to another woman, and he and his new fiancée had made it very clear that Victoria was not a part of their modern, fluid family. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The final unexpected encounter happened last month. I was at a charity auction at the Columbus Museum of Art with Catherine. We were bidding on a piece of contemporary art, laughing and having a good time. The event was black tie, elegant, the kind of social function I'd avoided when I was with Victoria because she always made them about her. I looked across the crowded room and I saw her. Victoria was there as a volunteer, one of the people in black aprons serving champagne and clearing plates. She was doing the work she would have once considered beneath her, serving the people who were once her peers. She saw me. She saw me with Catherine, a beautiful, successful woman laughing at my side. She saw me looking happy, relaxed, and completely, utterly indifferent to her existence. My arm was around Catherine's waist, and we were discussing which piece we wanted to bid on next, like two people who actually enjoyed each other's company. Her face, for just a fraction of a second, crumpled. The mask of bored resentment she was wearing slipped, and I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated regret. The kind of regret that comes from realizing you threw away something good because you wanted to prove a point. She turned and disappeared into the kitchen before I could even register the moment completely. Catherine didn't notice, she was too busy examining the auction catalog. I didn't mention it. There was nothing to say. That night, as Catherine and I drove home in my new Tesla through the quiet Columbus streets, I thought about that Sunday dinner over a year ago. The moment Victoria had given me that ultimatum, so confident in her position, so sure I would fold like I always had. That I thought about the word I'd said. Okay. It was the smallest word, the simplest response. But it had changed everything. It had ended a relationship that was slowly suffocating me. It had freed me to become the person I was meant to be. It had led me to Catherine, to this life, to this moment of genuine contentment. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is accept someone's terms exactly as they offer them. Victoria had drawn a line in the sand, and I'd simply respected it. She'd gambled that I needed her more than she needed me, and she'd lost. The wedding invitations never got mailed. The marriage never happened. And a year later, I couldn't have been more grateful for that family dinner, that ultimatum, and that single, quiet word that changed my life. Okay. It was the best decision I ever made.